Okay, hi everybody. I promised a couple of you, or maybe I announced this, that I'd try and do a little tutorial on the direct perspective grid. So I'm going to give this a try on my computer. I've actually got this open in Photoshop, and I think you can see there's a faint copy of the finished grid, just so that'll give me a little guide instead of completely freehanding it. So I'm trying to record just the area of the screen that I'm drawing the grid in, but you may see a menu or something else fly onto the screen as I switch tools or the cursor move across there. So bear with me. Hopefully you'll get the gist. I'll use the line tool and I'll talk about this as I do it. I'm going to use the line tool to get perfectly straight lines when I need something that you would be drawing with your T-square and triangle. I sketched a couple of these out in class, but I think so you can really see it. When you see me using the line tool, that means you're either using your triangle or T-square or a combination of both. Um, Again, once you master this, you can do it freehand, but for this exercise, I will be using some tools that kind of mimic what you would do at your table. So I'll try to go through those 7 steps, show you the process, um, and then you can watch this back up, see it as many times as you want in order to see the steps that I'm going through. Okay, so step 1, again, and this refers back to the 7-step PDF that I put on Angel, which you can look at. It has the still images of the steps, and then you'll be able to see kind of the process I work through here. So step 1 is just to locate the horizon line. So the space that we have here on the page, um, again, I suggested putting it in the middle or slightly below middle. For right now, since we're not doing any really tall elements, the middle's fine. But if you were doing space that had a 30-foot building behind it, if you can see faintly here, if this represents 10 feet, then I have to go 20, and 30 would be off the screen. So in that case, I'd want to set the horizon line a little bit lower. Of course, if you set this up and you build this grid first, when you go to use this to create your courtyard perspective, you can slide the sheet with the grid on it up and down to make sure you can accommodate the elements that are in the plan. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. So I'm going to get my line tool, and I think in the example in class, I used a red. So I'm going to pick a red color. I'm going to pick a space kind of in the middle here and just draw a line across. And that's my horizon line. So I'll go ahead and label that HL. So we've got a horizon line in there. That's our eye level. That's the view that we have, standing straight up, looking straight ahead, parallel with the ground plane. So the next step that we go through is to set the 10-foot vertical height and the convergence. So I did this in my demonstration. I didn't really point it out in the PDF of the step, but in order to set the vertical height, I mean, kind of to do that, you have to draw a line in there. So again, I'm going to get my line tool, and in this case, I'm just going to use a black line to draw it in there. And you know, how far over you go from the edge is kind of up to you, but since I have this grid in here already, I'm just going to draw a line down there and represent that edge. Now, again, once you put this on a trace paper, you can shift it back and forth. But the first time it's saying, okay, we want to make sure this is the same distance. Okay, the second thing I want to do, and I'll shift up to the other layer here, is actually decide on here what my measurement is. So if I want to make sure that's, in this example, I think I said, sorry, I just scribbled on the screen there. There we go. In this example, I said that we could use about 2.5 inches up and 2.5 inches down. That makes it easier for us to break this into 5 increments, but it really can be anything. If you made this 3 inches up and 3 inches down, your perspective grid will be a little larger, right? And it just means you have to make sure you have room on the paper to accommodate that. So if I had a scale, I think I'll try and pop a scale up later when I show you how to measure this, break this down into 5s. But for right now, let's assume I have my lines on here. So I would take my scale and I would put a mark there, take my scale, put a mark here, measure that out with the ruler, and just to show you, I'm going to clean it up here. I'll take my eraser and I'm going to erase the rest of that from the screen. So in terms of my spacing then, that would be Let's see if I can get a different brush here. So that would be 2.5. All right, for some reason that's not working right now. That would be 2.5 inches right there, and that's 2.5 inches right there. So the next step that we're going to do as well, the next part of this step is then to determine the convergence. So I did that in the other demonstration with yellow. So I'm going to pick a yellow color and use my line tool again. Now, if you were doing this, you could do it with your T-square. I said on somewhere over on the other side here, so maybe the first thing I would do is to use a black. And even though I know this ends here, just to say, well, I don't really know where that ends, so I'm going to pick a line here and just draw another vertical line there so I have something to work toward. And then the next thing I'm going to do is come back over here. I'll get my yellow. And you can do this two ways. You can take a line and kind of stretch it across and say, well, there's about level. I'm going to bend it down until I like the convergence. And then once you do that, you can measure that distance in there and then reproduce it over here. Or you could say, well, about 80% of this. So I think when we were looking at this in class, that maybe people were using, instead of 2.5, maybe 2.25, something like that. Again, you could scale that out and just, you want a little convergence, but not too much. So that's how you determine this. It's either take the measurement here and take 80% of that. So you subtract 20% of that and you get the, a number and you put that down, or you just visually do it. And eventually, as you do, if you do it mathematically for the first time, that's fine. But then you should just look at it so you start to see that convergence so that you can automatically just visually line that up and set up the convergence without really using numbers. But once you do one edge, you have to measure that and then repeat it on the other side. You don't want to guesstimate it here and guesstimate it on the bottom. Once you pick one line, you measure that and repeat that distance exactly. So I'll go ahead and put my convergence on here. I'm going to run that through there. And as I said, you should be doing this with a long triangle or your T-square. Okay, something like that. Let's move that over. Okay, so that's step two. We've put in two vertical lines, one on the right, one on the left. We've measured, start on the wide side, measure this, and set that to the dimension that will allow you to fit this on your paper. Might take some trial and error. Then you come over here and either set the convergence and measure, or use it mathematically and come up with a number that's slightly smaller than the right side or the large side. Place that over here, measure it out, and just draw the lines to connect it. So what you see here with the yellow on the top and bottom and the black lines on the right and left is the measurement plane. That's kind of this plane that sits across the front of our perspective. And hopefully with what you see in the background there, you're starting to get an idea. This is the first plane we're going to set up, and then we're going to go back into the distance, into the depth of the perspective. Okay, so the third step then is to establish our initial plane on the measurement plane, the initial square, sorry. So we have to figure out our first spatial unit, which is a square. And again, maybe if I can, okay, see if I can shift this over a little bit. There we go. So I just pulled my rulers up, which means I can pull a ruler off the side here as a guide. And if I start over here, I'm moving, I hope you can see this on the screen. I'm moving to the left, and that still looks a little vertical. Okay, the square is going to be a little narrower than it is tall, but it's not going to be that much. So if I keep moving, you can see that's almost square. So anywhere in the range, I would say from maybe something like that, that's probably too wide. If it's 5 inches, and that's another way you could do it, you could take this vertical dimension, measure it out horizontally, and then pull back from that a little bit. So since I already have a mark in order to keep this consistent, I'm going to put that line in there, and then I will use my line tool, and I think I will just do this with black and draw a line right along that mark. Okay, so you see the first line I have in there. It's lining up with the base, but basically you're trying to judge this distance. You know, this is 10 feet. So now we know that this is 10 feet across here. And that is purely a visual judgment. You have to decide that. Again, go to whatever this distance is, measure it out, and then come back from that a little bit, just a little for that first square. All right, then once we've got that judgment placed in there, then we can begin to extend the diagonals across. And that's really the next step in the process. So I'm going to go up to here, get my tool, again, just using black, and I'm going to start at this corner here. I'm going to drag through the center point. Okay, that's, I'm using the halfway point as a way to extend this. And you can see right there. Actually, let me do that in blue. I think I did that in blue in class, so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to start at the right corner. I'm going to use a straight edge and make sure I go right through the center point where the first 10-foot square hits the horizon line. And I don't have to worry about this. I can extend over here. That's fine. This is just a working line for me to start putting different lines in there. So I've got that set. Then I can come back over here, right to this intersection, and draw my next square in there. So there's 10 feet, there's 20 feet. And I'm not sure why my brush isn't working here. There we go. There's 10 feet. There's 20 feet. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my line, get my blue color. I'm going to come to 10 feet, go through the center point at 20, and extend it over the edge. Once I've got that, I go where that hits, draw straight down, and that's my 30 foot. Start at 20, go through the midpoint, and then draw my last line since the grid's supposed to be 40 feet across. There's my last measurement. Okay, so we set up this measurement plane, 30 feet, 40 feet. Okay, so we've got that boundary of the measurement plane. This line over here I don't really need. It just was a working line. So if you happen to put this line over here, then you might need to extend these convergence on the top and the bottom over to get your 40 feet in there. But that's okay. We just eventually want these 4 squares. And you can see they're getting smaller widthwise as they go across, which they should be doing, but not at a really extreme rate. Because this convergence, remember the left vanishing point, in this case, the far vanishing point is way out there somewhere. Okay, so we've extended that, we've established our marks. Now we want to set up for the depth judgment plane, and this is step 5 in the PDF. Okay, so let me go back to, there's one thing I forgot to do, and you might have noticed that, but before I can extend the judgment plane back to the vanishing point, I have to set the vanishing point. And my recommendation was you go to about halfway across here and maybe back a little bit. Now in this case, I think it's right about here. So it's, you know, halfway's right here. It could be anywhere in there. It actually could be a little past halfway. It will change your view slightly, but for now, we're keeping it there. So basically that gives you a wall on the right, in this case, that's kind of really foreshortened. You see the back wall really good, and you see the left wall really good. So this is where, if the detail in your design was over here, you would probably flip the grid over. So that way, this side would be the short side, and this side would be the long side, and you'd see what you want. So it just depends on what it is you're trying to show, and as you get used to using this, you'll understand how to set that up. Okay, so now that I have the vanishing point in there, I want to extend lines back, and since this was, I think I was using green for the depth judgment plane, I'm going to switch colors here. And I'm going to start at 30. Instead of doing it at 40, because I want to see the face of this cube when I make my next judgment, I'm going to start right up here, take this right back to the vanishing point, come down to the bottom of the 30 mark, and extend that to the vanishing point. Okay, and now I have to do the same thing. I'm going to pull a line out here, and there's left edge of the front face, right edge, and this is going back with the green lines. So again, since the convergence is so much steeper here, it's going from front to infinity just within the drawing. I can't make this look like a square. It's not really correct. It's going to be much shorter, and I would say it's probably a little less than half of the, might be less than half of the width of the front face. So you can see maybe from there to there, and then I've used a little less than half of that. So I'm going to go with this as the measurement, and I'll use my green color, my line, and I'm going to come up here and start at the top edge and draw a line down there. Let me hide those so you can see what's going on. And then I'm going to extend a line through there to there. Now I'll pick that point, draw straight down. I'm not sure I'm exactly hitting the lines the way I was before. Oh yeah, partly because okay, since I'm demoing over this, you can see I actually made a little different judgment. So let me back up a little bit. I can do that better. Okay, so I don't have the grid, but I have where this intersects my faint line under there. So I picked a slightly narrower one. Again, I was pretty close, but it wasn't exactly the same as I picked before. I wasn't looking at that. So I'll pick this here and set that as my first square. And then I will start here, go through the center point up to the top. Now that first measurement that I picked, that would have been perfectly fine. It's just, it wouldn't have lined up with the grid that I have underneath here. So instead of trying to fight with that, I'll keep it the same. But yeah, you can go a little more to the right, a little more to the left. That still would be okay. All right, so this is exact same process we did on the measurement plane. We're just going through the diagonal, from the top edge, bottom edge to the top edge, and just creating this grid all the way back. So I've got 10, 20, 30, 40. I need one more, since the grid's supposed to be 40 feet across and 50 feet deep. So as you look at this, you can see, you can also see the effect of the location of the vanishing points. Because if you think about, look at the distance on the paper, on the screen here, between 10, 20, 30, 40, that's 40 feet right there. Now on the front plane, it's 10, 20, 30, 40. So that's exactly the same dimension, but the measurement plane dimension takes up almost the whole 11 by 17 sheet, but your depth dimension only takes up a small percentage of it. And that's exactly the way it should be. The near vanishing point is going to have much stronger convergence than the far vanishing point. So the squares are going to look more distorted. They're going to have a smaller projected shape, like we talked about Monday, than the ones on the front. Okay, so you know, I've got this basic cube set up. I've got those lines set up. And now I've got most of the work actually done here. So actually extending those lines, that was step 6. Okay, I kind of combine those together. So the first is to make the judgment as to what this looks like. And again, if I want to, just to show you this. Let me fill it with okay, so if we have that, I don't know if I can make that better. Let's lighten that up a little bit. So you can kind of see, I don't have this line drawn very dark, but you can see that this is the face of the cube and that's the side of the cube going back the other direction. And that's what we want to look at when we make that judgment. And once that judgment is made, then we can extend that all the way back as far as we need to. In this case, it's 50 feet. Now, what that does is it gives us points on the ground plane all the way back that we can use to extend grids across the base, because that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to create kind of the boundaries of this space, and we want to create a 10 by 10 grid on the ground plane. That grid allows us to kind of draw back and forth, which maybe I'll sketch over this once I get it done very quickly. And so that's what we want to see. So we don't have to measure everything. We can estimate distances based on that grid. Okay, so we've got the measurement plane, horizon line, measurement plane, first square, extended it across to 40. And I don't know which of these. Okay, well, I kind of put them on the same grid there, but I'll get rid of those and pull the base one up in a little bit. So we've got that done. We've done the depth judgment plane to the vanishing point, and we've extended that back to 50. And then the last step is really to take all these construction lines and draw over that, actually create the grid that we need to use. And one more step to be actually to put these guidelines on the measurement plane. So I think what I will do is, let me see if I can turn these all off. And see if I can pull this up. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to give it a try. No, I think I lost. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to pull that up so we can see it a little bit better, and maybe I'll sketch over that. Okay, so on the ground plane, let's go up to final grid, swatches. On the ground plane, we're going to, I'll just do this freehand, kind of trace over that edge. All the way across to there, which we created this line just by extending it to the vanishing point there. And back up. We know where these 10-foot marks are, so if we extend those back to the vanishing point, and you would do this with a straight edge, I'm sketching it in now, but each of these lines are going right back to that vanishing point. And I'll get the 30-foot mark. And I've got the 40 I drew in first. So I've got those. And now I know where these, I have these points. If I turn that back on, remember I have that grid in there and I have all these points in the ground plane. So I want to draw across and make those horizontal grid lines. The problem is I don't have the far vanishing point, right? I can't see it. So what do? Well, what you do is, divide this vertical line into 5 units and 5 units here, and 5 units. And 5 units here around the horizon line. So if you can divide this into 5 and this into 5 here, again, there's the horizon line. Then I can connect this point and this point, and I can connect the 2-foot mark here with the 2-foot mark here, and so on. And what those lines represent is proper convergence to the far vanishing point. And that way, if I want to locate a point, and maybe let me do this on another layer here. If I was going to draw in here, once I have that line there, if I've located a point on my perspective that's right here, and I know it's going this way, if it's slightly above halfway here, slightly above the middle of the spacing between this line and this line, Then over here, I know it's slightly above halfway as well, and I can draw that line, not very well, apparently. I can draw that line in there to there, and then I can use my straight edge to bring it up from the vanishing point. And I know that that's converging properly. And if you look at this, if you look at the black line above and the black line below, you can tell that it's going the right direction. As I said in class, it looks parallel to the other ones because it's converging at the same rate. That's how we use these lines. You can kind of see them as being on the measurement plane, but since those lines are converging to the same vanishing point that the lines on the ground are, they're all parallel. So think of it as being up on the plane that you're looking through, but you can use that to judge exactly where lines go. So that's our second visual aid. And before we can draw that final grid in there, we need to establish these lines. So in order to do that, that's when we use our scale. So we've got the scale here, and this is where I demonstrated this in class. And basically, what we're going to do is take the scale. Oopsies, not that way. Take the scale and move it over. Now, you could do this out the other way. It doesn't matter which direction you do it, but since if I do it the other way, it'll be off the camera and you won't be able to see it. So what I'm doing is I'm taking 0 right there and I'm putting it at the bottom, 0 right along the right edge. All right, then the next thing I'm going to do, and if I can set this up right, I'm going to put my pivot point in Photoshop right there. Now what I want to do is tilt this until I get an even 5 units. Now it could be 5, could be 10, could be 15, 20. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what scale you use. You just need 5. It could be 5 half inches. Of course, that won't work because that's what this is, right? But if I take this and just rotate it down until that 5 is right on the line right there, now I can come across, I'll leave that in position, and I can come across and say, let's switch colors here. I can say, okay, there's an increment right there. Oh, let me put this on another sheet. There's an increment right there. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. Okay, so now if I get rid of my scale, I've got those lines, and all I need to do is get a straight edge, and I run those lines across perpendicular until it hits the edge. So each one of those, I would put a line in there, put a line in there. And this is why you want your T-square set up, so you can just slide your T-square down, hit that mark, and go perfectly parallel to the horizon line right over there, and you kind of tick off that mark. Okay, so these lines I'm putting on here, they're not the convergence lines, right? Because over here they don't line up. They're just allowing me to set up that 5 increments, and that way it doesn't matter whether this is even. In your case, since this is 2.5 inches, you can just measure out every 1/2 inch on the right. You don't have to do this. But on the left side, if it's 2 1/4, it's not going to line up. So you do the same thing. You just put your scale on there, you get it into place, you line it up with, the bottom part over here. Okay, let's go to scale, see if we can rotate it around. Okay. We're going to move it over here, place it at the bottom. Oh. And rotate that. Right now it's at 4. I've got it rotating around the wrong point now, so this may be a little hard to do, but you get the idea. It goes to 0. There we go, close enough to 5. You tick off at 1, 2, 3, 4. Extend those across horizontally with your T-square. Mark the points, and then once you get the points done, that's when you get rid of your scale. You don't have to see all your guidelines on there, and then you just use your lines, long straight edge to connect that point to that point. 3 foot to 3 foot. Okay, so you do that all the way across, and that gives you those sets of parallel lines converging to the far vanishing point. That's what they represent. And then you use those lines to be able to get down here. Let me put a couple more in so you can see how I would do that. So I'll put the 2 foot one in, and then I'll put the 1 foot one in. Oops, that didn't look very good, did it? Okay, 1 foot one. All right, so that's lined up. And now if I put my grid lines in, let's switch to a red. I can come over here. This one's almost right on the line, so that's pretty easy. I extend that across. And, you know, I'm looking at that kind of parallel. I'm actually a little off on that side, I think. It runs over to this side. This one, you can see it's about maybe a little more than a third of the way from the top. So I run that across there. Again, a little more than a third away from the top here. You just line those up and extend those across. I mean, you could try and break it down into measurements, but again, once you set up the grid, and when you look at it, you should be able to see that those things are actually look like they're all converging to the same vanishing point. That's the key thing. As long as that's done correctly, it looks correct, it is correct. That's all that matters. All right, sorry, it's getting a little messy here, but turn some of this stuff off. You can see how that was extended across and how those line up pretty well with these. Sometimes they'll fall on there, sometimes they won't, but you just have to look completely up and down around a point and say, this point's halfway, it's a third of the way. You go to the other end, make it the same proportion and connect the lines, and that's going to work. So hopefully that made some sense to you. You go through and you add the horizon line, the convergence, you add the first square in there, and then you extend that across, and so you get all the steps. Then you add the depth judgment plane in there, and once you've got that done, then you can add in the final lines for the ground plane for the grid. And what you really end up with then is this kind of enclosure with, you don't even have to have the depth judgment plane in there anymore. The final, you have these lines hitting the 40-foot wall, so you've got the depth judgment. The grid is your depth judgment plane. So you can, that's the one thing that's showing on here that you would get rid of. Anyway, I hope that makes a little sense with what I went over in class the other day. And I'm going to try and produce this in a version that you can watch online, and another version that'll be small enough you can watch on a smartphone, but we'll see how that goes. All right, thank you.